the very beginning of the process was being given something that was fundamentally dualistic. When I was given the knowledge, the very beginning of the process was being given something that was fundamentally dualistic. And it's the duality that's inherent in human design. It's the duality that's inherent in what I call the neutrino biverse, this cosmic environment that we live in. It's this fundamental duality that finally allows us to begin to see what's always been there and we simply have been unable to grasp. And you see, for so long we were working with a single way of approaching things. And in that single way of approaching things, there was always a limitation, whether it was the Babylonian astrologer or it was the thrower of I Ching sticks. There was a limitation in that. The most extraordinary thing about human design, and one of the questions that I was asked endlessly until there was enough evidence that it was valid, people kept on saying to me, "What's this 88 degrees business? Why is it 88 degrees of the sun before birth? Why?" And I would always, very flip, I would always say, "Well, that's what I was told," which of course is true. That is what I was told. But you see, it's the two calculations that create the essence and the beauty of what human design can show you. Without those two calculations, you don't get to see across. That's the whole point. If you do a calculation of your time of birth and you get the position of the sun and you get the position of the earth, they're going to be exactly opposite each other. They form an arm, but that's it. It's not just that half is missing. The whole is always greater than the sum of its parts. You see, this is a binary juxtaposed. That is, these two different sets of information, once they are juxtaposed within the framework of this illusion that we call a body and a life, you get the miracle of what it is to be us. You get this extraordinary combination of what we have access to and what we do not have access to. And the power in that of the program to be able to manipulate us regardless of our philosophies or religions, which is also kind of nice. It's this helplessness. You see, when I was first given the knowledge, I didn't spend a great deal of time with myself. Being an ego manifester, I always figured I was okay. You know what I mean? Even if it wasn't true. But what really fascinated me was that this seemed to be a way of understanding this incredible movement. This movement of consciousness and how it actually evolves. You see, the program down at our level, everybody who ever has a design done goes, "Wow, that's incredible, that's really, wow, And then they begin to grasp what the program does to them and they begin to get a little strange, They begin to see that they don't have any choice. They begin to see that they're being manipulated by this unseeable, unknowable program that they'd like to call God, but it's too late. And they don't know what to do. And then all of a sudden out of that, you go beyond that, you transcend that, because you see, the moment that you understand that it's not personal, please, it's not personal. That's the whole thing about life. It's not personal. We take it personal, but it's not. And the moment that you see that it's not personal, you begin to understand something. We are a component. We're a component of something. We're an aspect of something. We are an integrated aspect of something that is so vast, that our little vanity begins to crumble immediately any moment that we begin to take, "Well, it's me." I always was frightened about ever telling anybody about incarnation crosses. "Oh, yes, I'm the cross of the duty." And I think, oh my God, people are going to run around saying, "Yeah, I was born on this cross." And see, vanity is such a thing. That cross that you come in on, if you really understood how tightly bound you are to that, how helpless you are in that, and how few human beings ever in their life ever get to glimpse for a second what it is to be on that cross. They don't get to see it. They're fighting with the not self. They don't get a chance. And the only way in which that cross works is at a deep, deep level, because it's integrated into the program, and you make your contribution whether you like it or not, whether you're aware or not, whether you're conscious or not, whether you're a jerk or not, that contribution is being made. We've seen that in the dream rave. We know that we're participating at a non-personal level for a third of our life anyway. So what I want to bring you to through this process in these 4 days is not about you saying, this is my cross. Because that's not what it's about. Oh yeah, you'll do it anyway, but what cross do you have, It's not about that. It's about seeing this incredible mechanism. It's a mechanism. You see, what's being unfolded here is that today I begin a process of taking you to the deepest levels that anyone has ever been able to go, and understanding the nature of what it is to be. This process of taking you down from the crosses down into the substructure of the line is to take you down to finite archetypes, to take you to the point of understanding that there is a finite program and we all fit into it. These crosses are essential, because what all these crosses represent as we see them moving through the wheel is that they represent the genetic code of the evolutionary process that's taking place with us at its heart. Each and every one of us come in and have a contribution to make, and there will be a time when we will never be able to afford to have any of those links missing. And the fact is that when you begin to calculate how many actual crosses there are, there's only about 60 to 90 variations of human beings per cross. That's not a lot. It's very minor. And they're all part of our continuing code. The way in which this is going to work is that we're going to begin up here at the 13th gate. And one of the things to see is that when you're first introduced to human design, you're introduced to the G center, the 8 gates of the G center, and the way in which the 8 gates of the G center divide the zodiac into 8 equal parts. And one of the things to look at is that when you're looking at this movement that is coming around, if you start at the 13th gate, and if you look at the hexagram itself, you will see that the first line and the second line, the first line is yang and the second line is yin. That configuration of the first line being yang and the second line being yin in the 13 is going to continue, and it's going to continue for 16 consecutive hexagrams. This is a quarter of the wheel. In other words, that quarter of the wheel that starts at the 13th gate, the fellowship of man, and comes down here to the 24th gate, the return, that's 16 hexagrams. And if you look at them, you'll see they all have exactly the same base. That base is they have a yang line, that's the first line, and the second line is going to be a yin line. In this way, the zodiac is divided up into 4 quarters. In the context of the Global Incarnation Index, these quarters are referred to as realms. And each of these realms is going to begin with a gate of the Sphinx. The Sphinx cross is the 13 in Aquarius and the 7 in Leo, the 2 in Taurus and the 1 in Scorpio. This is the cross of the Sphinx, and as you know in design, this is a cross of direction. In other words, each of the quarters of the zodiac begin with a gate from the cross of the Sphinx and complete with a gate from the cross of the 4 ways. Now, the cross of the 4 ways is the 24th gate, the return. That's in Taurus. The 44th gate coming to meet, that's in Scorpio. The 19th gate approach in Aquarius, and the 33rd gate retreat in Leo. In other words, every single one of these realms, every single one of these quarters is going to begin with a gate from the Sphinx and is going to close with a gate of the cross of the 4 ways. Each of these quarters represent larger general themes in the way in which the incarnation process is broken up. We're going to begin with the realm of Alcyone. And the realm of Alcyone, which is called the quarter of initiation, The quarter of initiation begins with the 13th gate and will finish with the 24th gate, 16 hexagrams later. Now, one of the things to understand about what I mean by a cross being in a quarter. All crosses are measured, that is, they're named and configured based on the position of the personality sun in the chart. In other words, if your personality sun is in any of the 16 gates between the 13 and the 24, your cross is a cross that's part of this realm of Alcyone, this quarter of initiation. So it has to do with the position of the personality sun. The quarter of initiation is about the beginnings of things. And everything having to do with this quarter of initiation is rooted in the need to progress. And what you will see is that the way in which the wheel is broken up into its four realms, that the next quarter is going to be the quarter of civilization. This is where the form is perfected, and the form that's able to provide for humanity and secure it. That's followed by the quarter of duality, and this brings in sex and the need to replicate and deal with our connection with the yin and the yang coming together. And finally, it will finish with the quarter of mutation. These four basic themes, each of them are the byproduct of separate programming. We live in a vast neutrino ocean, and we're all participating in that programming by receiving the neutrino feed and processing it through our crystals. However, these four objects that are mentioned here that are rulers, so to speak, of these quarters, Alcyone, Dubhe, Jupiter, and Sirius, they are programming agents of their own. In other words, they filter outside information. They transform that, focus that information, and literally pass that information on to that quarter. In other words, they filter the neutrino stream in terms of programming in that specific quarter. In taking you through this, the first thing that you're going to notice is that we're going to have to deal with the structure, and the structure that takes place in any single hexagram according to the position of the sun according to line. So the first thing to recognize is that if we take the position of the personality sun, if we have the personality sun and the personality sun is going to be in a first line, we know that the design sun is either going to be in a third line, that's the foundation cross, a 1-3, or they're going to be in the fourth line, that's a changing cross, that is a 1-4. What you see here is the 12 possibilities of those line combinations. And those 12 possibilities of line combinations are going to exist for every single hexagram as we move through its structure. In other words, what we're going to get to see is if your sun is going to be, let's say in any gate, let's say it's going to be in the first gate, that sun in the first gate is going to be in the first gate, first line, second line, third line, fourth line, fifth, and sixth, as an example. And as it moves through from the first to the sixth line, the design is changing underneath, and we get the three basic divisions that are going to give us the three archetypal crosses per hexagram. There are three archetypal crosses per hexagram. There are 7 right angle crosses per hexagram. 7. There is 1 juxtaposed cross. And there are 4 left angle crosses per hexagram. In other words, in a hexagram, what you're looking at is that there are 12 basic crosses that can come out of the sun being in a hexagram in any of its lines. Those 12 basic crosses of that personality sun are going to be broken up into 3 groups. What we're going to look at is not each specific cross. We're going to look at the themes of these 3 groups per hexagram. In other words, we're going to look at the right angle theme, we're going to look at the juxtaposed theme, and we're going to look at the left angle theme. Now, in dealing with that, the first thing to understand in the basis of analysis of a cross is that the right angle cross, that is, if you're a 1-3 all the way to a 4-6, any of those 7 variations in between, that what you have is you have personal destiny as your geometry. Now remember that personal destiny means that you are self-absorbed and self-involved. But one of the things to understand about that is that everything within the context of design has a polarity because it's a dualistic system. And one of the things to notice is that I've heard some very funny feedback. For example, we know that left angle crosses have transpersonal karma as a geometry. In other words, they can only be fulfilled through their interrelationship with the other. Now, there's many people who will have transpersonal karma, okay, who will say, well, look, I've got to deal with the karma, and the 1-3 says, and I don't. In other words, the right angle is walking around saying, well, you know, I'm self-involved, I've got a personal destiny, I don't have to deal with karma. Now, that's true, but they're forgetting something. See, the right angle makes karma. Think about that. See, the left angle has to deal with karma. The left angle is always dealing with old geometries. Always, always. So everybody that I meet in my life, I'm transpersonal. Everybody that I meet, it's part of an old geometry. It doesn't matter if I know whether they were Cleopatra or not. The geometry is there. But if you're dealing with a 1-3, a 1-3 does not come in with that kind of connection. They come in for their own destiny. The right angle is coming in to fulfill their own process and are self-absorbed in that way. But as they go through that process, the people that they meet, they're going to have to deal with later. In other words, they're beginning something, whereas the left angle is finishing something off. Now look, when I say things like that, I can hear the moral knuckles cracking. There's no morality attached to what I just said. And it's very important to recognize that. It's not like making karma is either good or bad, you know, and you don't have to make karma because you've been bad, or you're making karma as a reward because you've been good. You know, it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just geometries. We get everything. We get everything endlessly, at least in the way in which that we can frame time. So it's very important to understand something about the right angle. Yes, the right angle is self-absorbed, but they're mucking around. In other words, they're creating connections and geometries that they're going to have to deal with in the future. Whereas the left angle is transpersonal. Now, the whole thing about the left angle is that the left angle can't stand on their own feet. It's not possible for them. In other words, there always has to be a support system. There always has to be in place those that are part of their geometry. The only truly unique geometry is that the right angle and the left angle are funny mirrors to each other. They're just sort of funny mirrors. But when you're looking at the juxtaposed cross, which is the 4-1, you're looking at fixed fate. They are very unique in their geometry. Nothing is getting in the way of that geometry, and that geometry is neither dependent on the other or not. It's simply moving through. So look, we have 3 different themes that are going to be present in each of these crosses. In other words, we're going to have the right angle, we're going to have the fixed fate, we're going to have the juxtaposed, and we're going to have the left angle. It's these general themes we're looking at. The other thing I want you to keep in mind, I have to take you through 196 archetypes, so I'm going to move quickly, and you'll get into the flow of it, and you'll get into the dance of all of this. But before we get there, I want you to keep something in mind. We begin with the 13th gate and the fellowship of man. Here we have the fellowship of man, and in the fellowship of man, what we have is that in this cross of the Sphinx, we know that the sun being here in the 13, the sun in the 13 is going to condition the way in which this cross is going to operate. So this cross is going to operate through what the 13th gate is. This is a gate of being empathic. It is a gate of being open. It's part of the channel of the prodigal child. It's all about being able to store experiential information, to be able to hold secrets inside, and to be able to bring those secrets out. Now, anybody that comes in on the right angle cross of the Sphinx, anybody who carries a Sphinx in their design, and those of you who have been working in design a long time will have met many, many people who are Sphinxes. It's common. that the most important trait is to recognize that they are here to give guidance. They are here to give direction to others. Now, the way in which they give direction is going to be cued to that 13. In other words, the 13th gate is always looking backward. It's never looking forward. It's always looking at the past. It's reminiscing. It's remembering. It's collating experience. It's the root of the memory that becomes history. And so that 13th gate, when it's being the prime source of that activation of the cross, then you'll see that when you meet somebody that's got their sun in 13, they're a Sphinx, what you know about them is don't ask them about where to go tomorrow. I'm looking for a job. They don't know. That's not what they're here for. Ask them what happened yesterday. Ask them what happened last month. And then you're going to get the value of their guidance. And remember something about Sphinxes. They're very, very, very important to our evolutionary movement. Because the whole Sphinx setup is rooted in the first and second gates, going down ultimately to the 14. The keeper of keys, getting the sacral energy necessary to bring the mutative force of direction into the world. And the Sphinx is always representing direction. So it's very important that when you have a gathering, there's going to be a time in which people will come together according to their cross. You see, if somebody has the sun in the 13, and somebody has the sun in the 7, and somebody has the sun in the 1, and somebody has the sun in the 2, and they're all right angles, only if you bring the four of them together are you really going to get a perspective on direction. After all, each and every one of them have their own little way. And of course, they end up influencing everybody in their own way. My favorite story about Sphinxes is what happens in the supermarket every day. Every day. You're a Sphinx and you're standing in line at the checkout counter. And there's a few people behind you and there's a few people in front of you and they're all in your aura. And you're directing them. You're giving them new direction. Now, if this one shows up, right angle cross, first variation, sun in the 13, the person they're standing beside suddenly starts thinking about something that happened to them yesterday. Why did I take that direction? They're suddenly thinking. It's being initiated by the Sphinx that's in their aura. See, the moment you lose your personal vanity, you'll begin to understand something. All the Sphinxes in the world are driving all of us. Now, they may be driving us nuts, but they're driving us. And there's nothing we can do about that. All of them together, they're all representing that theme within the program to give direction to the totality. It's one of my Hitlerite black jokes, is that if we eliminated all the 10th gates on Earth, nobody would know how to behave. It'd be a wild place. Nobody would know how to survive. They would all just die off. We keep a few 10s around who we think are nice. The fact is that the moment that you stop taking it personally, you'll see that, look at your charts. I'm always amazed at people who know design. They look at their charts, there's all this white space. On the computer program, you can do a reversal. And in doing that reversal, you can see all the things you don't have. Like the 40 gates you don't have. There's 64, you got 40, you don't have them. There's all this stuff that you don't have. So you have to see where you get it. We live in the world. All these Sphinxes are running around pushing us in different directions. And we need them. But you see, we can't trust them by themselves. Got to have a Sphinx convention. If you don't have a Sphinx convention, don't trust them. Because it's just all perspective. This right angle Sphinx isn't interested in giving anybody direction. Why should they be? I got no karma. Right angle. They're only interested in finding direction for themselves. And of course, they end up being lost most of the time. They just do. They're self-absorbed. They're trying to figure out this is the direction, that's the direction. And every time they walk by somebody, they actually do something valuable in return. Their life's a mess. Everybody else is getting direction. I have a friend of mine, very dear friend of mine, Sannyasin, one of the first people that had contact with me after my experience. And he had an undefined G center, and he was a Sphinx. And it was a very funny thing to look. You'd look at his G center and there would be these, it's that trident, the 3 fingers sticking up and the one down below, and this guy was so lost. I mean, endlessly lost. Nice guy, but always lost. Typical undefined G, didn't know whether he was ever in the right direction. But you can't imagine how many human beings he helped, he guided, and he directed. Unbelievable. Totally selflessly. I mean, I was one of them. He came up to me one day and gave me a great deal of money and said, go away and write a book. This was somebody who had no direction themselves whatsoever. So there's all these sphinxes running around, and of course they're giving everybody else direction. So when you meet somebody and you look at their chart and you see, sphinx, because you get a lot of them, look where the sun is. It's going to tell you so much about what they're here for. You see, if you come in on that cross, you're here to make past. Does that make sense? These are people that create a living, vibrant past with everything they do. These are people that love their past. They've got scrapbooks to their past. They've got the little mementos, from when they went to see this or had that or blah, blah, blah. They got all this stuff from the past. It's their own self-absorption, and we need them after all. One of the most important things to understand about the nature of the Sphinx is that regardless of what you think about the person who's carrying it, that structure within them, it has enormous impact on everybody around them. So it begins here. Now think about that. This is not arbitrary that I start this in the 13 for you. This is a beginning place because this is the end. This is the true alpha and omega in the sense of the way the program works. And when the time will come for the world that we live in and the forms that we have to be history, we will see that the global themes, that is the larger themes and the larger movement of the autumnal equinox, will be in the 13th gate. In other words, this is a beginning place and this is an ending place. Remember, this is the quarter of initiation. It's where the quarter of initiation begins. And by the way, what makes this the quarter of initiation? It's not about anything other than mind. This is the quarter of the cosmic mind fuck. This is what we're all caught up in. You see, this is what makes us different. And it is this incredible initiation of mind that you find in this quarter. And it is the fellowship of man, this gate, and its enormous influence on the abstract process, because it is the collector of human experience. It is out of this capacity to remember, and ultimately the capacity to articulate out of that remembrance, that allowed us to make enormous leaps in terms of our ability to create a dense mental maya, so that we can finally, after millennium and millennium of frustration, figure out how basic things actually work. But this is the mind field. So when you meet somebody who is a Sphinx and their sun is in the 13th gate, you know that they are beginning and closing energies. There's I can't remember his name. I think he's actually an Austrian or a German philosopher who said that the future is the past racing towards us. And this is somebody with the sun in 13. That's something that they really understand. That is where we get our cliches about history repeats itself and all of these things. That's all from the 13. Remember something. The very first cross variation of a right angle cross with the sun in the 13th gate is a 1-3. This is the primary beginning always in structure. And of course, it's important to understand that this beginning of structure, the 1-3, the personality sun in 1, the design sun in 3, that what this represents is in the 1, if the foundation is not solid, then anarchy is demanded. In other words, if the foundation is not correct, then the foundation must be torn down in order for a new foundation to be built. So one of the things that happens is that when these sphinxes come in, the right angle, sun in the 13, what they're looking for are all the foundations that don't work. That's their job. And they store them mentally, and they're storing them in order to do one of two things. Either to suffer as martyrs in deep pessimism for the rest of their lives, or to discover out of that and in turn be able to impact on others and teach others what does not work. So they're a very important guide for us. And of course, it's one of those things to see that right at the beginning, at the very first incarnation, in that sense, at the beginning of this wheel, that what you have is instability. See the 88 degrees. If your designed sun was 90 degrees away, everything would be locked and there would be no life. See, the 88 degrees brings change. And the change that it brings is this constant movement. The 1-3 becomes a 1-4, the 1-4 becomes a 2-4, the 2-4 becomes a 2-5. There's this movement as it weaves its way through. This is the basic of direction. They're going to talk about basic things. By the time you get to the personality sun in the fourth line, you're getting ready for transition. In the years where I used to do public introductions, I used to talk about the impact of the I Ching and the mathematics of the I Ching. I was not somebody who had any esoteric background when these things happened to me. And the way in which the mathematics works, its relationship to the genetics and the codon structure was something that was really extraordinary for me. But there's something else that's really funny. It's funny in that sort of mysterious, spooky way. I mean, after all, the ancient I Ching was built on changing lines. You know, it was built on changing lines. And when I was given this knowledge, of course, I was given this knowledge, and lo and behold, there are the changing lines. You see, when you get to the last 7 minutes, and you get into the last part of a line is 56 minutes plus, what happens is that the designed sun, because it's 88 degrees instead of 90, is actually going to change lines. There is a changing place. So we have two kinds of crosses that are always associated with the position of the personality sun. So you can see here you have a 1-3 and a 1-4. Now the vast majority of people that are going to carry a 1-3, because that's the largest part of the arc of the hexagram. You know, only a minority of people are going to carry the 1-4 because that's a changing portion and it represents only 1/8 of the arc of the hexagram. So there is this changing place. And of course, what happens with the changing place is that the unconscious theme is going to change. When you get to the sun in the fourth line, you have the last right angle cross, and the last right angle cross is going to be the 4-6. That's the 7th right angle cross. And that 4-6, the personality sun in the 4, the designed sun in the 6, when the personality sun gets to the last 7 minutes of arc, what's going to happen is that the design is going to shift. And instead of going to a 7th line, because there's no 7th line, it has to go into the next hexagram, into the next first line. This is called a juxtaposition cross, and this is the place of juxtaposition. One arm stays the same, but the other arm changes. The nature of right angle and left angle. First of all, right angle is very, very easy to recognize because if you look at a right angle cross, it's based on hexagrams. So what happens with the right angle cross is that the moment that you have an activation in a gate and you draw a line to the other side, and the moment you make a perfect cross in between, you'll see that the points between them is always 16 hexagrams. In other words, it's a perfect right angle, or looks that way. But of course, we know the hexagram has a subdivision. So what's happening in that is that wherever the position of the personality sun is, so for example, here the personality sun being down here in the 45th gate, and what happens is that the moment that you get to the left angle, it's this other arm, the design arm, that shifts. So in other words, one arm stays the same. That's the arm that has the personality sun. But the design arm is shifting because when you get to the end of the 6th line at the design side, you have to step over into the next hexagram. This gives you a left angle configuration, but the very first one is called juxtaposition. When the sun is in the 13th gate, in the 4th line, and when the design sun shifts, it moves from the first hexagram into the 43rd hexagram. And in moving into the 43rd hexagram, we obviously have a totally different configuration. So what we have is personality sun, 13-4, the personality earth in the 7-4, and then we have the design sun and earth, the 43-1 and the 23-1. This is a juxtaposition cross. It's the juxtaposition cross of listening. Now, think about the transition that we've just had. We've had a transition from being the right angle cross of the Sphinx, in which that right angle cross with the personality sun in that 13th gate, that its concern is with the past, its own process with the past, and trying to root out failure in the past. And if it can't root that out and rebuild, then it's going to suffer its pessimism and end up a martyr, those kind of things. Here we have a sudden shift, and we have a shift into a very, very fixed process. This fixed faith, the cross of listening, the 13th gate, is all about the capacity inherent in us to be able to listen. That's what it's about. It's about collecting the experience of others. But one of the things about it is that when you have a Sphinx configuration, the Sphinx is naturally there to transform what it takes in and to give it to the other as a direction. It just does. In other words, it doesn't know it's doing that. And of course, if you tell Sphinxes they're doing that, particularly right angles, they start putting badges on. But the moment that you get to this fixed fate, what you get to is something that can be very, very uncomfortable, because these are people who come into the world to listen and not speak. They have enormous difficulty in being able to explain themselves. Enormous difficulty in being able to explain themselves. Now remember, we have an interesting shift that's taking place at the design level. They're moving from being a 1-2 at the design to being a 43-23. And remember that the 43-23 is going to bring a definition, because it's an opposition not only in the zodiac, but it forms the channel of individuality between the ajna center and the throat. You can see here, quite different, whereas the cross of the Sphinx, there's no definition, but here you can see that there is immediately a definition from the 43-23. However, despite the fact that the throat is activated, remember there's something deeply troubling to the 23rd gate experience. The 23rd gate is not like the collective process in the throat. The 62nd gate translates a picture and comes up with detail logically, because they're translating a pattern directly. The abstract process in the 56th gate is about translating a picture, but a moving picture. Rather than a pattern that is being described, there is a movement or an experience that's being described. But individuality is unique and mutative. There is no formal background. There is no Solomon's world where nothing is new. And in this cross of listening, there is a tremendous amount of pressure on these people, and they can be very, very uncomfortable because they have enormous difficulties in being able to express themselves, yet at the same time they are the great listeners. Great listeners. And they know secrets that no one will ever, ever, ever hear. And they've always been around. They're kind of a magical part of the Sphinx that's off on the side. That's what happens in these movements. Remember that still one arm of this cross is still the 13-7. It still carries with this Sphinx power. Yet all of a sudden there's this shift in the mental plane. Now what the 23rd gate has to do is that, unlike the collective process of the mind, which is based on vision, all individuality is based on acoustics. In other words, the 43 is a sound in one's head. One assumes it's not. A sound that one hears that says, you got it now, I got it now, I got it now, doesn't mean that they're going to be able to express it out of that 23rd gate. As a matter of fact, the juxtaposition cross of listening can also be called the cross of stuttering. In other words, there can be many, many problems here. Very important, if you meet somebody with that, don't torture them. Allow them to listen without pressure to share. This is the biggest thing in their life. They are in fact our sentinels. They are listening, and they are listening for all of us. They are collecting experience. What often happens with many of them is that they can find ultimately another venue to be able to get that out. Rarely is it historically correct. In other words, they find artistic, because of the 4323, they tend to find artistic outlets for what they've been listening to. They're great appreciators of music, as an example. They're the kind of human beings that love a good lecture, or whatever these things are. But they themselves, again, there's all this pressure on them that they can't get it out. Remember, that's a necessary ingredient. I mean, we must have them for everything that's there. You have to see how important it is. It's not this, the poor thing, The fact of the matter is that if they're living out their design, that is, if they're living out their authority and their type, being a listener and not being a talker is their heaven. I mean, after all, it's what they're here for, and they fulfill that purpose, or a purpose for the totality in that role. Right? What that brings us to is what happens when we get to the transpersonal level of this. Now think about this movement. We start off with the cross of the Sphinx, where we're going to have this, this is what happened yesterday, this is what happened to you last month, this is the direction you could take based on recognizing what happened to you in the past. You get to the fixed aspect, you've got the same intake. The same empathic field is at work, but it's very different. There is no need in that sense within their purpose. Remember, your incarnation cross is your purpose. There's no purpose in bringing it out when you get to this fixed aspect. But when you get to the left angle, you get to transpersonal karma. And when you get to transpersonal karma, what you get to is a physical, structural, programmed obligation. It's an obligation, to integrate with the other and get that information across to them. Okay, and the way that you get that information across, we start with the 13-5 and the 7-5. The 13-5 is the savior, the 7-5 is the general. Okay, this is the general savior now that's a freak. Right? 43-1, 23-1. Right? So you got your savior, general freak, who's going to blurt out their mutation, and the way they're going to do that is that they're going to hide behind a facade. Now don't go, again, no morality in my saying hide behind a facade. They have no choice. Their life is about masks. They need those masks. Now the reason that they need those masks is that what happens to these beings is that they are always under pressure from all of those people that are connected to them karmically, that they deliver the goods. And the goods are, what's the direction? They're still carrying the 13 and the 7. They're still carrying collective direction out of the G center as part of their cross. And because it's going to be, particularly in the case of the 5th line, it's going to be a deep projection field where other people are saying, look, we expect you to give us a direction. Now, these are the kind of people that don't give you the direction in the supermarket. They're not right angle. The left angle has a sense of that because they have to deal with the other and they recognize what the other wants from them or gets from them. Oh, it's very different. And what you find with the left angle cross of the mask is that you need to have, how shall I put this politely? Initials after your name. Dr. blah, 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 or whatever, or costume, if you're going to be a tarot card reader, dressed like a 17th century mannequin. I don't know. You have to have your costume, whether that costume is psychic, whether that costume is covering your personality, whatever it is, these people get inside of those costumes and then they get to play out that role. Now, one of the things to understand about the juxtaposition and the left angle and the right angle of this cross is that they're all carrying individuality. So the first thing to recognize about the way the program begins is that the program begins with melancholy. Isn't that nice? Eh? Otherwise you wouldn't enjoy the music. Well, that's what it's all about after all. This is just orchestration here. This is the quarter of initiation. It starts with melancholy. It starts with sadness, and it starts with art. It starts with music. It starts with love, because individuality is at the core of what love is. It is the search for perfect love. It is the search for the ultimate love, cosmic love, self-love, and union with the other in love, romance. All of that's at the very beginning. That's the starting place. And the starting place is the right angle 13 saying, was there love back there? Did I get any? Or will I get any? You know, and by the time you get to the juxtaposition cross, they're just listening for it. It's out there somewhere. You know, they're the ones that are listening to love songs at night, you know. No lover, just a teddy bear, but the love songs are great. You know, they got the radio on to some schmaltz station somewhere. And then finally you get to the right angle, and the right angle says, okay, listen here, I'll put on my configuration. I'll tell you exactly what you need to know, because if I don't tell you what you need to know, I can't survive in this life. So I'm going to tell you all about it, but I'm going to tell you all about it based on my sadness. See, look, it's one thing for me to be able to describe to you the mechanics of how these crosses actually work, but it's another thing to recognize that the people that are carrying all of this stuff are unawake. They're really deeply fucked up. They're living the not self. They don't know what the hell's going on, and they're certainly not tuned to their process, which is why that, you know, the greatest dilemma on the planet is that if you ask just about anybody on this planet, they're all going to lament that they don't know what their purpose is. Well, if you're living the not self, you're not going to get there anyway. And it's important to understand that this very beginning of initiation, this very beginning process, that most of the time that is all mired and bogged down by the deep depression that these people actually live out. Think about what that's like. You know, think about what that's like to live out the phenomena of looking back and you don't, you know, what you see you don't like. And they don't know what to do with it, and they don't know why they're seeing it. You know, and they end up being pessimistic about everything, and they think everything is terrible, and so forth and so on. You know, the way in which we look at the nature of life on this planet, there's a lot of people on this planet who don't think that any of this living business is worthwhile at all. You know, let's get rid of it, and, you know, it's not functional. You know, why don't we have a meteorite hit us and we can have something fun happen? The sun in the 13th hexagram, as it moves in the 13th hexagram up here, it's going to move next into the 49th hexagram. And the moment that it moves into the 49th hexagram, we go from the left angle theme, the transpersonal theme, that is the left angle cross of masks, and we enter into the next step, and that next step is entering into the next cross, the next right angle cross. Now think about what that really means. Think about the nature of 6 lines. I've been doing a great deal of work in this last year in educating students of design about the nature of the 6th line and how it works and how it is a mutative force in our lives. To be able to understand that 6 lines operate through 3 different distinct phases in the life. That the first phase is a phase of the Saturn cycle of 28.5 years approximately, in which the 6th line individual lives out a 3rd line theme of trial and error. That's why 6th line people have a very hard time, physically speaking. They're the ones that die young, get early diseases, have all kinds of problems. The moment that they get past that Saturn point, they enter into the plateau period where they become aloof. They go up onto the roof, the 6th line being the top of the hexagram. That's where they have their opportunity for authority. That's where they have their opportunity to disengage. And we now know, since the discovery of Chiron in the 70s, that what Chiron represents is a cyclical transformation, a new mutation for us in a new living cycle. Most of us now live well into our 80s, and we have a new cycle that opens up in which all 6th line beings who are carrying the 6th line in their personality carry this mutation in the world now. And that mutation is the Chiron return. In that Chiron moment, the 6th line comes back down into the world. Now look, this is one of the most important times in our history. This is the first generation that can consciously be aware of their Chiron return and their re-entering into the world. You see, if the 6th line doesn't come down off the roof, it doesn't enter into the next 1st line phase. I mean, just think about that as a picture. You finally get up to the roof of the house up there, but how are you going to get to the next hexagram in the first line? That sixth line has to come down and complete its process. Now, throughout our history, that has actually not been the case. Now, when Uranus was discovered in 1781, when we went from being 7-centered to being 9-centered, that was the moment that our life cycle changed. The midlife changed from being 15 years approximately to being 40 years approximately. Big difference in life cycle. It's very important for us to see that the sixth line now, all 6 lines now, have a chance to complete their cycle. In other words, to come down off of the roof and to re-enter into the world. So what we're doing here is that we're following a story, if you will. The story begins with the past. In the beginning, there's always something that happened first. It begins with the past. Looking back over your shoulder. Jesus, look at that. Boom, big bang, there you are. You have a past. But the next step is the 49th gate. The 49th gate says, food.
אני סתם יוצאת מנקודת הנחה שזה אולי תרגום לזה, אבל זה באמת לא משנה. אני כל הזמן רואה את הדבר הזה שכשאנחנו כאילו בלחץ.
It's so interesting how food intrudes. I mean, if you're going to be alive and you're going to be in a body, food intrudes. And, it's very nice that you got all this intellectual stuff at the beginning. Oh, that looks great back there. But the next thing that happens is, wait a minute. If we're going to go forward, we're going to need something to eat. And if we're going to need something to eat, we're going to have to do something that you may not have thought about. We're going to have to kill. So let's all get out there and sharpen our spears and kill. Oh, yes, you see, the program spares nothing. We will see kinkiness, we will see everything, but killing comes early. Now, of course, this doesn't say that it's about killing your neighbor or your wife. It's about killing animals and eating them. The 4919, this is the cross-special connection between the design of mammals and the design of humans. This is where we meet at the deepest mystical level with the mammalian world. This is the beginning of religion. This is the root of animism. So when you come to the 49th gate, not only do you come to a moment where you're not looking into the past, but you're looking at something else. Is there a God? Is there anything worth worshiping? And there better be a God, because we got to do a lot of killing, and maybe it's okay. And maybe if we sort of kill the creature for God, anyway, it gets into that whole movie. It's very important to see that next step, when we come to this cross, we come to the right angle cross of explanation. Now, this cross has gone through many, many things, since the beginning of our round, which started about 16,000 years ago. This cross is very, very important. What it basically establishes what principles are necessary, what answers are necessary in order to be able to satisfy our needs. It is a very, very important basic point. It's also emotional. And it's freaky at the same time, because it has a designed Sun-Earth in the 4323. So you have this very, very strong individuality that has continued as a theme underneath. Now, one of the things to understand about this cross of explanation is that these are people that are always trying to establish who belongs in the revolution. This is their thing. In other words, that 49th gate, even when you're looking at it at a right angle level, that 49th gate is always looking for some kind of ally. Because at its deepest level, it is about sacrifice. This is the gate of being sacrificed or being the sacrificer. This is the butcher. You can't imagine how many butchers I know, real butchers, people butcher meat, who have the 49th gate. aside from dictators and human butchers who have the 49th gate. You know, if you look around at serial killers, murders, butchers, you'll get the movie. That 49th gate is there. Now look, it doesn't mean that if you have the 49th gate, you know, that we're going to give you a special card and have a buzzer on you so that we can lock you up if you're bad. But it's so important to understand the volatility of the emotional system. After all, this is a gate of emotional principles that's going to operate in a wave that's moving from hope to pain again, where there's no truth in the now. So one of the things to understand about the right angle cross of explanation is that these people always have to explain themselves because they're always getting into trouble. You wait until you meet these people. They're always having to explain themselves because they're always getting into trouble. And they're always getting into trouble because what comes out of the tensions that come out of the violence that's inherent in this gate. They get into a lot of arguments over who gets the best. You ever seen wild cats kill something and have a friendly discussion over who gets the best parts? One of the most interesting things about this cross today is that, you know, there's a phrase, itinerant prophets. You get a lot of kind of funny prophets who are walking around with this kind of cross. You know, they are the ones who really think that they can explain things. And it would be really nice if they were on the cross of listening. However, there's not much we can do about that. As the bard said, methinks he doth protest too much. You know, they explain you to death. And of course, what often happens with them, 4323 being what it is that what they explain, you walk away saying, I don't know what they mean. I don't know what they're talking about, and I really don't know what they're trying to explain to me. You know, because again, you have a tremendous difficulty in the 4323, and remember how common it is on the planet. See, mutation isn't something that is easily transformed into language and articulated. It just doesn't work that way. There's a great deal of struggle attached with all of that. Okay, so what happens? The right angle doesn't have transpersonal skills, so the right angle is going around saying, this is the principle. I want you to work with me, not because I care about you, not because I want you, not because I like you, not because of anything other than I need you because there's more wolves than us. In other words, there's not a great deal of caring in that. The moment that you meet somebody who has their personality sun in the 49-1, you're going to meet a revolutionary that rarely has followers. That's why they're always trying to explain themselves. No, really, if you come with me, really. But, you know, the other person knows they're not going to offer me anything. You know, I'm going to build the church. They're going to sit in the front pew. When it shifts, when you get to the juxtaposition point, when you get to the sun in the 49-4 and you get to the end of the fourth line, and the designed sun is going to move, it's going to move from the 6th line, from the 43-6, it's going to move into the 14-1. And then you have the sun in 14 and the earth in 8. 14th gate, as we well know, the 14th gate is possession in great measure. And of course, this is the gate that fuels the Sphinx, provides the energy for direction in life. And it provides the potential for great wealth. Now, it's one of the interesting things about this is that the struggle that's inherent in this first step, that is, you come to the point where you see that in order to move towards any kind of future, you're going to have allies. The 49 is tribal. It is the theme, after all, it's personality sun. You're going to have allies. You're going to have to work together, and you're going to have to kill together. Now, the whole thing about killing is that killing and God seem to work together really nice. You know, 49th gate, you got Abraham, you know, kill me a son. Okay. Really? Okay. Where? Over there? Sure. You know, this is what this is all about here. The relationship between the two. One of the ways in which we were designed to be at peace with killing was to turn it into religion. I mean, to make it holy. You know, so you get your little sacrament and you get your little this. You have your holy feasts. You know, and that way everybody sort of feels really good. No, we're having this. We killed this bear for God. God doesn't need it. And God doesn't need it. However, makes me feel better that I killed this bear for God and not for me. It's tribal. They come up with these wonderful bargains that nobody else is a part of except them. This is my bargain with God. I don't care what God thinks. I killed the bear for you. I'm free of guilt. Not only that, I'll show you how much I love the bear. We'll put the bear up in the sky and we'll worship it. Anyway, so when you get to the juxtaposition and you get to the fixed fate, what you get to is principles. This is the juxtaposition cross of principles. Now, the principles are about something very basic. It's about, first of all, getting rid of the freak. You'll notice at the moment that we move here to the cross of principles, the 4323 disappears at the design level and we have the 14 and the 8. So we get rid of the individual mind, we get rid of the definition, we get rid of this blah, blah, blah that's going to be so much a part of that explanation, and we step into the principles. Now look, these people are the ones that are fodder. They're always ahead of their time. They are always revolutionaries ahead of their time, and they never get to eat. They're never the revolutionaries that actually get to sit on the Revolutionary Council, because they die long before a Revolutionary Council ever comes into existence. In other words, they are forerunners fixed to a principle. And in being fixed to that principle, by the way, they're not really balanced in that. The one thing that's important for them is that this is about human rights. And it is the only cross that truly is there to make sure that human rights are protected. That's why I call them early revolutionaries. This is somebody who sees the first factory being built, in southern England, 400 years ago and says, oh, the workers are going to be enslaved. It doesn't wait till Marx, It's way, way ahead of the time. And if you look back historically and you look for this cross, you're going to find extraordinary figures. You're going to find the kind of figures that history forgets. They're the ones that put something in very fixed, but because they're very fixed, easily broken. And because they're ahead of their time, they tend to disappear and they're gone from the map. That movement from that fixed aspect is that you step into the left angle cross of revolution. This is pure revolution. Now, the only thing that is uncomfortable about this revolution is that this revolution is about money. And when I say it's about money, it's about they don't deserve to have that. Let's kill the sons of bitches and share it. It is the basis of revolution, after all. Now, this is practical revolution when it's in the fifth line. So, in other words, this is simply a very practical thing. Look, they're greedy as hell. They're not going to share with us. They hate us. They're enslaving us. We cannot reason with them. It does not work. The only practical thing we can do is kill them. And if we kill them, then we can have a practical way in which we can share everything. Human beings and their spiritual trip always sort of tickles me in funny places. You see, we're a living thing. I never forget the endless world wars that go on in my body every second as I breathe. The violence inherent in my biology is unbelievable. Take a ride with a T-cell. Watch some real havoc. This is a violent existence. It just is. We are designed to kill. We are. And we will be designed to kill until we leave these bodies. And there is nothing that's going to get rid of that. Nothing. Nothing. Otherwise, we wouldn't be at the top of the food chain. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in charge. And there is nothing you can do about it. You cannot civilize that. You'll see what happens when we take this cross over to civilization. Where we try to civilize it. Moses comes down and says, "Thou shalt not kill." Hey, cool. You're designed to kill, right? But you can't. You're not allowed. Don't do that. It's wrong. Civilization comes along and says, "Look, we all got to live together in this neighborhood, and it's kind of funny if you're killing somebody next door, We got to have some rules here. Let's find a place where they can kill and it doesn't disturb us, Let them kill those people over there in the next valley. That's okay. That might even be practical." You see, again, we're at the beginning of the story. Remember, I'm going to take you through the whole story, so don't get nervous. But we're at the beginning of the story. And you see, we've got to have that. So right at the beginning, we've got this trip that's just embedded in us. We got to go out there and kill them. And we have to somehow find a way to make that okay, to sanctify that. Now, if you listen to a 49.5, by the way, I'm a 49.5, but it's not my cross. If you listen to a 49.5, you're listening to a powerful potential revolutionary. I'm here to seduce you into revolution. I'm here to seduce you to these principles. It is a very powerful force. And remember, all fifth lines draw projection. You expect me to be able to teach you this. I don't know if I can. But you expect that. That's your projection on me. If I manage to get through these 4 days and survive it, you'll all say, "Gee, that was great, wasn't it?" If I blow it, the fifth line crumbles. So this is a fifth line revolution. It's the fifth line revolution that says, look, it's very, very practical. This is what we're going to do. We're going to eliminate all the private farms and we're going to put you on one huge, massive farm the size of Europe. And we're going to end up growing more than we've ever imagined. Sounds practical. Devastating. Oh, and by the way, in order to get all those farms, we're going to kill all the former owners, okay? We have to do that. It's practical, all right? We get them out of the way and then we can sort of just make this big farm. That's what they do. That's what they've always done. And you can't get rid of them. Sometimes we turn them into heroes. Sometimes we turn them into villains. See, after all, if they deliver, they're always heroes. As long as they fulfill the projection of those that are following that principle, they're always going to be heroes. The next thing about that is, it's not just about establishing a new principle and a revolution, it's about benefiting from it. There's no sense having a revolution if you're not going to benefit from it. Now, one of the oldest things that exists in the way in which humans have dealt with each other is that you go in and you attack the tribe in the next valley and you kill all the males and you screw all the females and you drag them home. That's part of what goes on. And you see, this is the way in which we learn from each other. Isn't that funny? Can you imagine that? Think about that. That's the way history has worked, eh? One tribe conquers the next tribe. They bring their gods, they bring their furniture, they bring their stuff. And then the ones that they conquered, they've got gods, they've got furniture, they've got stuff. And slowly those things come together, and out of that, you've got something new that emerges out of that. It's the way that it works. So you see, basically, we're designed to go to the next village and kill and rape. What to do, right? Isn't that funny, eh? And you got all these people saying, hey, that's all bad stuff, we can't do that. It's hilarious to me. Yeah, sure, you'll see, we have ways in which we try to deal with all of that. But you have to understand the people who come in on that cross, that's what they're here for. That's what they're here for. See, I know right now in this world, when you've got 3 billion people that go to bed hungry, you've got all kinds of killing that's waiting to happen. And just will. Because it's all about food. It's all about food. The 49th gate says you must have what you need to eat. We as a community must have what we need to eat. And if we don't have what we need to eat, we will go to war to get it. Because that's what we are. We're animals, after all. You know, the veneer and the patina of civilization on humanity is like so thin. And it's so recent. And everybody's running around with their morality trip instead of understanding that all of these things have their place. They do. But you know, in a world in which human beings are not properly fed, you can't run around crying for peace. You got to run around crying for organization. We've got enough food to feed everybody. You know, that's never the problem. It's about material. You see, one of the strongest themes at the beginning of the story of what it is to be in this global program is that we must band together to survive. It was not easy for humans in the beginning to compete in the world. You know, we really had to develop communal skills, and communal skills that were rooted in violence and protection. We had to. You don't just get rid of that. You don't sit down in some marble building and write a law that says you can't do this and you can't do that, because I will show you that everything is here. You can't legislate that. We're a totality. Every single aspect of life is here. And there are human beings who are carrying them as archetypes. The sixth line of the 49. The sixth line has to make an enormous jump in the 49. When the 49-6 comes off the roof, it has to come off the roof with principles in which it can provide for itself. And that the principles that allow it to provide for itself are principles that can open up for others. However, the moment that it has that, and the moment it steps down off of the roof, what does it meet? Desire. I love the way the program works. You see, you look back, you get nervous. You look forward, you sharpen your swords. And then, desire. You see, human beings, we're so helpless in the way in which we're driven. You have no idea, you know, how powerful the whip is and the carrot is that is in front of you that is whipping you along. And it begins with the 30th gate, and it begins with the right angle cross of contagion. When the voice described to me the change that will come at the end of this form, it talked about how the only stream out of the emotional system that will not experience the mutation of becoming aware is the stream that starts in the 41 and ends in the 35. That is, this is the stream of feelings. And this stream of feelings is the human experiential way. Logically, in that context, the human experiential way will disappear because the human form will go with it. But it's something so important to understand about the nature of this stream is that it is not capable of awareness. And it is that not capable of awareness that leads to the potential of all experience. Fools do rush in. Oh, yes, and desire makes fools out of all of us. And you know, in the beginning was the sound, but it was a wolf's whistle. I mean, desire really gets to you, eh? So when you come to this cross of contagion, you've got this incredible desire that says, yeah, we can kill the bear, but what about the elephant? Let's get the elephant. Oh, I'd love the elephant. It starts a whole process of saying, well, there's more. There's got to be more. Now that we're able to control the tribe in the next valley, maybe there's another valley. Maybe there's more. I don't want to eat these berries. Maybe there's more. And the desire leads to expectation. So this is the beginning of the human expectation process. Now look, without this 30th gate of desire, we wouldn't be here. Oh, it's so important. It moves us in such a profound way. Because you see, what desire does is it says, there isn't anything out there that we cannot try. Remember, it's collective. You know. So think about the beginning of healing. If you don't have somebody who's got this stream or aspects in this stream, you're never going to figure out what works. You know, there's two of you walking along in a field.